Our next guest is in Pittsburgh today to receive the prestigious Heinz Award, created by Teresa Heinz to honor outstanding individuals for their achievements in the arts, public policy, technology, and the human condition, economy, employment, and the environment. Our guest is being honored for his work in the environment, even though he's also a pediatrician. We welcome Dr. Richard Jackson, host and narrator of the Designing Healthy Communities, a public television project and DVD series, a project that looks at what must change in order to improve the quality of children's health and our own. Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be with you,
Good to have you with us. So you started as a pediatrician, but what led you down this path toward really the environmental impact?
I started out as a pediatrician, thought I wanted to do that, and then I went off to CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and I fell in love with public health. At first I was doing infectious disease investigations, and then we did more and more environment work. And about 10 years ago, I became head of the National Center for Environmental Health at CDC, the top health and environment job in the country. And over that time, I began to realize that what we were building was influencing our health a great deal.
And so tell me what the problems are, first of all, because I think a lot of people don't even realize how much the environment is impacting all of us, and especially our children.
Well, you know, when I started out, we knew a lot about lead poisoning and how that affects the developing brain. We learned more and more about chemicals and how they affected us. And I spent a lot of time thinking about big issues like climate change. And then about 10 years ago, it struck me that what really is influencing people's lives and children's lives was the quality of the environment they're living in. Can you walk to meet your life needs? Can you be physically active? What's the quality of food? Can you be around people that you love? And I began to assert that some of the problems we're looking at with obesity, with depression, with lack of physical activity was because of how we had built America. Not simply because people are lazy, because that's not the good enough reason.
Interesting. And what about things like cancer and heart disease and asthma? Are those also impacted by environment?
If you live in a highly air-polluted area, asthma rates for children are 3 times higher. And one of the best ways to reduce air pollution is to remove or decrease vehicular traffic and pollution coming out of vehicles. A fair proportion of our cancer is related to obesity, too much fat on board. Now, we think that obesity is a personal problem. Oh, you don't have any self-control. But the truth is that a lot of it is because of the food environment we're living in. Food that is not good for us is half as expensive as it was 30 years ago. And food that is good for us is twice as expensive.
Wow, I've never heard that statistic.
So what it's done is, it's kind of a bargain to buy stuff with a lot of calories, a lot of fat in it. And the stuff that's good for us is expensive. And so actually one of the interventions to put in place is a lot more farmers markets, and particularly for poor people to be able to use food stamps at farmers markets.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, and now in your 4-part series, Designing Healthy Communities, you really go to the places and talk with the people about specific things that they're doing. And I want everyone to learn about this one woman named Otana. We've got some video of her for people to look at. Tell me about her story, because it's a nice example of what's happening.
I was in Washington, D.C. for this meeting of frankly some of the brightest kids in the country, and she did a presentation, 16 years old. She does a presentation on air pollution in Riverside, California, where she lived. And her mom had been hospitalized many times when she was a young girl because of asthma. In fact, the mother was a doctor who couldn't practice because of her asthma being so bad. And this young woman dedicated her life now to really working on how the environment's influencing people's health.
And it was amazing, too. I mean, it was a very stressful thing for her to see her mother in the hospital. They had to move away from the father. And you don't think about the ways that something like an environmental problem is impacting one person's family so dramatically.
You know, we visited in this series about 20 cities, and one of the things I came away with was real admiration for the young people. And I worry about the world we're giving them in terms of obesity and debt and diabetes and other issues. But I also think that we need to empower them and enable them to show and be the leaders that they are.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the solutions, because there are cities that are doing really creative things. So tell me some of the ones that you like most. What's being done out there?
City Elgin, Illinois. Elgin Watch Company went out of business in the 1950s, and the downtown area was Superfund sites. You couldn't get near the river, and what happened was the surrounding areas were filled with franchise businesses, but there was really no heart in the city, and folks decided we want a real downtown. Kids really want to be able to walk to school, and they've cleaned up that area, they've put in parks, and it's really become a heart for that city. The kids are still demanding we want more places to be. We've too often made it hard for young people to socialize. We interviewed a bunch of girls in Smyrna, Georgia. They were 13, 14, 15 years old. They said, we can't go anywhere unless our mother drives us.
Wow.
And that's not good. Boredom is dangerous in high school kids. They need to be busy with healthy activity.
So the point is you need a downtown the kids can actually walk to. Is that's really a lot of it?
You know, you need community, and community can be blocked by physical environments that you create, or it can be enabled by physical environments.
And let's talk about Detroit, because I think both of these, Elgin and Detroit, are just cities that Pittsburgh can relate to with the change in the manufacturing industry. Tell me what you saw there and what's being done.
I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and so this depopulation of downtown and field after field of open spaces that I saw in Detroit was familiar, but poor Detroit is really struggling. On the other hand, there's now a farmer's market downtown called Eastern Market. It's a place of the heart. You walk through, there's big sheds filled with flowers and fresh food, and you see people of all colors and ages smiling, going through, and they're now putting in fields and green space around it. And at first, for the African American community, the agriculture message, locally grown food, was a bit difficult because of the history of slavery. And yet now we're seeing young African Americans greatly embracing the need to be growing their own food.
Interesting. I never would have thought of that history either. Have you looked at Pittsburgh at all and how it's doing in terms of healthy environments?
You know, I remember visiting Pittsburgh years ago, and you've done a wonderful job. I think one thing that strikes me most is your parks. You've really focused on creating green space, and the father of American parks was a fellow named Frederick Law Olmsted, and he called parks the lungs of the city. And we don't think of parks and green space as built environments, but they were all in someone's mind. And maybe that's the biggest message. If we have in our mind a place of health, and particularly for our children and grandchildren, we'll get it. And if we have in our mind we're just going to leave it the way it is, we're not going to get those changes.
What's it like to be able to receive the Heinz Award today?
You know, I admire John Heinz, and I really admire Teresa, because I've gotten to know Teresa Heinz. I've gotten to know her much better. I never thought I'd get this award. It was pretty humbling for a baby doctor to get an environment award, but in a way, what happens to our environment is what happens to our children and our grandchildren.
And what would your message be to people watching? What can we do personally, whether it's for our own families or in our communities?
Well, one thing, as I say, no soft drinks in the house and no TV screens. I hate to say this to you, in the bedrooms, but for kids especially. But I think community needs to, people need to connect with each other. And if you want change, there's got to be a dialogue, a conversation in that community. And too often I see communities arrive and say, we want 20 different things, and the political leaders can't do them. And if the community has a dialogue and says, here's the one thing we want, they always get it.
Wow. Good. That's a great point. Well, you've done the research and seen what can be done, so thanks for sharing that with us, Dr.
It's an honor to be with you, Christine.
All right, if you're interested in learning what you can do to improve the quality of life for yourself and your community, visit Dr. Jackson's website, or you can also pick up a copy of the DVD series called Designing Healthy Communities, and you can go to KDKA.com/PTL for the link.